Oh dear. Yeah. I do often talk about how I often get this sinking feeling like there's something I didn't quite prepare for this stream. Every so often I am right. And today it's that I didn't change the stream title to be anything different. Equinox Buildcraft Day. Equinox time. Sure. Close enough. Oh, it's fine. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we are going to talk about Equinox. Add 30 seconds to timer. I also messed up my timestamps. This is going to be Equinox's framework Buildcraft Day. And I'm excited about Equinox because I feel like this is a good... so I'm excited about Equinox just in general. I like talking about builds for Equinox. I actually have two different fashions for this frame based on which build I'm using, because I consider them to be kind of rooted in certain forms, and I'll talk about that more a little bit. But I'm also excited about Equinox because I think that Equinox is a good place for like new focus. There's some not specific interesting stuff. I just wasn't really doing anything with the old focus system on Equinox, and I do think there are some really relevant things. Okay, a few specific things. I would like to make Framework into a series that goes on my main YouTube channel, the YouTube channel that hopefully brings in new people as well. I think that Framework is a thing that could go there. I think that I've just been in the midst of changing my ideas about what I want on that channel, like a lot of times in the past few months. And as I've thought about it more, as we've been doing more Framework, I'm not good enough at it yet to make it the way I want, but I feel like we're fairly close. So I'm going to make a real effort to make it as good as possible. If I feel like we get, a few in the row that I feel like are up to the standard I would want for the main channel, then yeah, we'll probably put them on there. There's also the weirdness of like the focus system. So we've done the Ember one with the new focus. But the weirdness here, of course, is that this significantly changes Buildcraft for a lot of frames in Warframe. This is, it's a minor... Among the many Buildcraft choices in Warframe, this is not like a huge one necessarily, but it is a very powerful one. You can get some very strong effects from focus. I do think that it was improved in scope so much that it kind of does go from being something that was sort of an afterthought, like you're probably just going to use this, to being a main part of a build, or even enabling some builds. Much like how, imagine if Parazon got like 30 new mods added and they added 5 more mod slots. Suddenly, and they reworked mercy kills, and enemies could be mercied even after they died, but they counted as being dead, so you could very reliably get those effects. Like, imagine that happened. Suddenly, yeah, it's like a whole new part of Buildcraft. There are also some significant new arcanes. Basically just the recent update added some very significant stuff, most of which I either don't have fully unlocked, or just haven't explored yet, and most of you also haven't done those things. So we can't fully incorporate these rather meaningful parts of Warframe's Buildcraft into Warframe fully right now. Would like to say, as a closing thought about that topic, that I think that this is sort of a problem for Warframe as a whole. Something that I plan to cover in videos going forward is like the relative sustainability or lack thereof in maintaining your Buildcraft stuff in Warframe. If I want to make a set of builds that is sort of like everything, and then keep updating it, that would require spending an amount of time playing the game that will prevent so many other builds in other games from getting made that it's not worth it. Like, for me, it's just not going to happen, probably. But I want it to, and so I would like to see what happens, and then that will be the way to demonstrate. You could decide for yourself if this is too much time for you. And I will, as a matter of course, decide if it's too much time for me. I think that topic is really interesting. Warframe is a really interesting game for that topic. Like, how much do you need to... A lot of people say they feel like it's very hard to get back into Warframe, and I think those people just desperately feel the need to have the new things, but you do not need to have the new things. unless the part of the game you find fun is making builds with those new things. And the new things always upend the Buildcraft, and I think that that is mostly true in Warframe. Like, when there is a new Buildcraft thing, like a major Buildcraft thing, which is like once every year, that thing does upend the Buildcraft from before. If it didn't, then you could just say like, well, I can still enjoy building what was there. But I feel like it does. The new things do kind of invalidate or replace the old things, which is mostly very bad. But what are you going to do? As a final closing comment, I would also like to note that it's possible that Warframe is building toward a sort of more properly finished form. Focus was just not fully realized before, and now is. I kind of feel that way. But there are enough different things in Warframe that are not fully realized and aren't that close to being fully realized.
But let me leave these here. Hope you're well, Bud. You have my support, smiley face.
Bud. Smiley face. Mog, as usual, your text-to-speeching is absolutely glorious. I think the text-to-speech voice really did it justice. Thank you for the 500 bits. Welcome back. Good to hear from you. Just concluding this little topic about how Warframe is a game that has, for almost 10 years now, added in these new elements that sort of upend or invalidate or replace Buildcraft that was there before, not merely added to it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that will always happen forever. I think it will, but it doesn't have to. It's not like it's impossible that it won't. There are games that do that, and that is how the game is made, Path of Exile it's baked into Path of Exile, as far as I can tell, that they are going to change up the build tools, which I'm not saying is necessarily bad. I'm just saying that's an example of a game where you wouldn't say like they're working toward a more permanently complete version of the build stuff, and then they would just like add new weapons or whatever, like Warframe. I think that might happen in Warframe. It's just unclear. Anyway, that's my spiel about that. I think that's important. I don't think Warframe like makes a lot of sense unless you think about that. A lot of the things added to the game, it's like, why do systems get redone so often? I think it's worth engaging with, like, is that working toward a complete whole, or is it a possibly unsustainable loop to keep the game fresh, but only by pulling out the roots of a previous plant? Again, I don't think the latter thing is true, but I think the game really begs the question. You can't think about it and not have that occur to you. There's the ARRchive Parley forum. I'm going to do a split, and we're going to start talking about Equinox. So yeah, that was my little beginning spiel. In short, I just, I wanted to make it known that I was interested in, building up a framework. There are, other things I want to add. For now, we're going to add Equinox, which means I'm going to start by doing an overview. A little challenging for Equinox because we have, two forms. There are a couple different abilities in here. So let me catch up on chat, and then I'll do that. Ace, welcome back. Proaxel, welcome back. I haven't tried those new arcanes, as I explained a minute ago, but I do think they're really important, really interesting, and I don't think saying it's better than Arcane Energize really makes sense, but people like to word things that way. I really don't. I would like to talk about their pros and cons sometime. Absolutely. Fingers, welcome back. Bastards, welcome back. Mr. Foot, welcome back. Equinox, Rusty, welcome back. Equinox's passive is okay. It's a little. It is a mini equilibrium. So when you get a health orb, you get a very small amount of energy. When you get an energy orb, you get a very small amount of health. Now it's really, really too little for this to matter. I feel. You can pretend this does not exist. It doesn't give you more energy in any meaningful way. I think this is just too weak. I do really like the idea of this passive. I think if it was like 25 or 50%, for example, that could be pretty meaningful. You could really play with that. You could treat generating a health orb like an energy orb, and there'd be some context where that could be pretty interesting. Companions, for example, with synth deconstruct, among a few other things. As is, you should just pretend Equinox doesn't have a passive for now. Metamorphosis. So of course, Equinox is a Warframe that swaps between two forms, and this is the ability that does the swapping. Now, it also gives you a buff with a long base duration. When you move into day form, you get bonus damage, so I believe base damage, and speed, movement speed. And when you move into night form, you get bonus shields, like shield maximum, and armor value. These are affected by, strength and duration and stuff. They're minor bonuses, but if you build a lot of strength, I do think they become rather meaningful. The big question for this ability is, are you going to make an Equinox build that's swapping forms or kind of camping one form? And, for what reason? Because otherwise, these might just not come up that much. But I think it's pretty interesting. We're going to talk about augments later, but I do specifically want to mention duality because I think it's one of the, when I say bigger augments in the game, I just mean that it really makes the ability do something well outside of the ability's normal function. It doesn't just make Metamorphosis better, it's like a new ability. It does a truly new thing. So you might think this is kind of underwhelming as an ability, but there are some payoffs if you just cast this as a matter of course. Cool. What I'm going to do is go through day form abilities first and then go back to night form abilities. Rage. You cast on enemies. They, in a small area, they get a debuff that makes them more vulnerable to incoming damage by quite a bit. They take much more damage, and they also get a speed increase. They move and I think attack faster, I kind of forget. But they move faster in any case. The cast range on this ability is extremely high, but the effective radius is a little low unless you build a lot of strength. But yeah, Rage basically makes enemies take way more damage. Pretty straightforward. Ha 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 ha, this is the helmet build. Let's swap to one that isn't. Sorry, putting my cards on the table a bit quickly there. That's not tasteful. Provoke. This creates an aura that gives ability strength to nearby allies. This is great because you can snapshot it into your own abilities, which isn't particularly great for Dayform Equinox unmodified, in my opinion. We'll talk about Maim first and then come back to that. But yeah, your allies get some strength. Interesting combinations with other abilities, but on its own, I don't think this is that exciting. Maim. This deploys a field around you. When enemies enter it, they take a little bit of slash damage. That slash damage, the little bit that they take, that scales with strength. It's very small. It's real small. When enemies take damage, die inside of Maim's area, you store up damage, and then you can release it to pulse that damage out to nearby enemies. Now that isn't affected by strength, really. It's just you absorb that amount of damage, and then you fire it off when you're ready. Reducing enemy armor or shields makes them much more vulnerable to that. But you can store up, basically infinite damage. And so every so often, Equinox can hit a button in day form that just kind of blows up the world, which is pretty spicy. Now, by default, the charge doesn't carry over between forms. There's an augment for that, and we're going to get back to that later. But yeah, you could add strength with Provoke to Maim, but that's only going to make that tiny initial slash proc higher. So keep in mind that I don't feel it doesn't really do much. I've always found Provoke kind of underwhelming unless you go for some combos, especially with teammates. You can do some pretty interesting stuff with another player. I'm going to catch back up on chat, and then we're going to do night form. I saw a question from Feather. You said, do you lose the current bonuses if you swap again before the duration ends? Yeah, so if you have some of Metamorphosis bonuses, and then you swap to the other form, you do not keep the ones from before. You can only have one set of buffs at a time. You could build a lot of duration with this, and swap and have both if they remain, but they don't. When you swap forms, you cleanse the buff from the previous one. That's a good question. Welcome back, Small Hat and Vamper and Darius, and I saw Snowman and Rainmaker. Large Man, you said, is this currently for a video? I just put these stream archives on a YouTube channel, but yeah, I mean, it's yes and no. I think this is an important thing to do at the beginning of a discussion about a frame. A lot of discussions I've had over many, many years talking about frames in Warframe and builds and other stuff. a lot of those discussions have been rendered almost pointless because some people, or I, thought that we understood things about a skill that we did not. And we ended up spending most of the time talking past each other. So I felt that it's, a good way to start. And, these are 2-hour streams, or when it's an archive. So it doesn't take up too much time. That's another reason. It feels like it's probably worth including an overview of the abilities and some comments. It highlights my biases. If I don't understand the abilities, that comes up, and I'm sure there are many people lurking in chat during these streams that don't know what some of these abilities do or had a misconception about them. In fact, every single time that we've done this for a frame, somebody, at least one person, has spoken up and said, oh, I didn't know that ability did that, which in my mind means we really should do it. So I know it sounds a bit scripty. It isn't, but thank you for asking. I haven't used the Incarnon weapons, but the evolution system thing is an interesting idea, sure. Some Warframes, gain stuff as they level up, but I think that's a cool idea. I just haven't used those weapons yet. I always wait a long time to play new updates, so I haven't played Angels of the Zeraman yet. Right, so we'll do Nightform Equinox now. Nightform has rest. Again, like Rage, this has a very long cast range, but the actual area it affects is small. Not tiny, but small. For a very high base duration, enemies simply go to sleep. They're vulnerable to finishers, and if you do enough damage to them, they wake up. But yeah, it's a very quick casting, very long range, very inexpensive. Like, those enemies just don't move. Pow, pow, pow. Those enemies are asleep. As like a random ability that you just snap your fingers and enemies don't move goes, I think this is a reasonably solid one. Rest, Nightform, Pacify, the third ability. You emit an aura, and nearby enemies don't do as much damage. This can be a powerful form of tanking. It's basically damage reduction for you and your squad. Can be a pretty good effect in my experience if you want to try tanking damage as Equinox. It also has a nice little interaction with Mend. You activate a field. People get shields when they get kills. When enemies die in the area, allies get shields. Now, of course, reducing enemies' incoming damage is basically damage reduction for you, and it applies to those shields. So if you can maintain both of them, that is a decent amount of defense. And then you can reactivate the Nightform version for a heal, kind of like Trinity's Blessing, but then you get sort of a channel thing. So, yeah, that's Nightform. Again, the big thing to think about is whether you're going to play Equinox as Dayform or as Nightform or as both. And here's where, certainly for Equinox, I think it might be more helpful than usual for me to give example builds. I just have whatever I had built on these frames prior to us starting these discussions. And for this particular frame, I think that what I have might be like a little bit more of a helpful starting point than normal. So these weapons are just random. You can ignore this stuff. We haven't done anything with it yet. Let's just put it on Xenarix so nobody asks questions about that. And for now, we'll talk about it later. And yeah, I have 2 builds that I've been using. And I don't know if they both have helmet abilities that I liked. We'll find out. We could develop them. I'm not saying we need to talk about these builds per se. Just that I think this is like an unusually helpful frame to have a starting point for. Right. Quick question. Lord Rusty says, wait, the shields from Nightform are from the passive component of the 4, not the active? You get shields passively when enemies are killed in the radius, and when you activate it, you restore health and shields. In Nightform. So I made a build that I use a lot for a lot of things that swaps forms, and there are kind of 2 augments here. Energy transfer makes the charge hold over between day and night form, mend and maim. And this is a little bit of a frustrating augment because it doesn't like do anything per se. Like a lot of people would figure that just would carry over. The thing that's cool but also kind of frustrating about this is that it's really good, in my opinion, because just a flat heal isn't particularly amazing, but gaining shields steadily as enemies die nearby is pretty nice. And charging up that damage in Mend and Maim and then releasing it in day form to do a bunch of damage, that's really good, but the tiny slash damage in day form is usually not that powerful. So energy transfer allows you to have your cake and eat it too. It lets you use the good passive night form effect while charging it up, benefiting from that while it's active. You're charging up the damage for Maim, and then you can use the active that is kind of better overall, I feel, more impactful, the Maim one. You kind of get the best of both worlds. But all this really does is make Mend and Maim into a single good skill rather than two slightly underwhelming skills for an augment that kind of feels like it should be part of the ability. So I'm a bit frustrated that like this is an augment. This is a place where Equinox could maybe eventually get some rework attention, and that could be a place to target. But I do think it's interesting and good. Like it is potent in gameplay, and it's interesting from a game design perspective how, yeah, like Mr. Foot's saying, how Maim is kind of dominated by the active and Mend by the passive part of the ability, which makes this really elegantly good, just kind of frustrating game design. But I do think it's very good. In practice, what this does is allow you to stay in night form while charging Maim, which keeps you a lot safer for a few reasons. And it also allows you to gain shields when enemies die while charging Maim. Thinking of it that way, that is clearly worth a mod slot for the type of build that would want that effect. That's quite a bit for your mod slot. Just you need to be playing a build that would want to swap between forms and would want to charge Maim. And since I'm swapping, I'm going to use duality. This is really elegant too. Duality gives you a clone. When you swap forms, you get, the other half that you swapped out of manifests and fights for you for a little bit as a specter. It gets 300% damage. It just does triple damage. The thing about that is it's not affected by strength. It is affected by duration. That means that you can dump strength because Maim isn't really affected by strength, and the clone still does full damage. And when you dump strength, you get more range from overextended, which is really good for Maim. So that's a really elegant combination of effects. You end up with a build where you pretty much, for just as a matter of course, you get a companion that fights alongside you and does a lot of damage, and you get the best of both worlds with Mend and Maim for not even that much space. Then you could just max range, add some stuff to make these powers not cost like an arm and a leg to maintain, and so you can use rest to keep enemies asleep to defend yourself in night form, and then adaptation gives you some damage reduction for the shields that are coming in from Mend and Maim. I don't love this. It's kind of awkward. Like, I really wish that we had something that was less damage reduction, but you didn't need to build it up. It's kind of a non-bow with things like rest. Like, if you're constantly putting enemies to sleep, it's not great to need your damage reduction to, like, you take damage and then it builds up, But I don't think it's terrible. Another thing I don't think is terrible is pillage on this build. Removing some of the armor is really good for Maim. It's very powerful when you release all that stored up damage, and this gives you a ton of overshields to defend yourself with. So I do think that this is a really great ability. Having this might warrant dropping at just giving up on damage reduction. Enemies will either be stunned or bouncing off your full frontal crusade worth of overshields. Or dead because you hit Maim afterward. Maybe that's a better approach. Like, you could kind of drop adaptation here. Many times when we've done that on Framework, I and others of you have recommended Rolling Guard. If you're going to run like kind of no damage reduction, or there's going to be some other way you survive, I think Rolling Guard is a really elegant addition that gives you some kind of like a panic button effect. Again, in theory, if this was active all the time, 90% damage reduction for all these shields is great. It just, like, in practice, it isn't in theory. as one is wont to notice, you will not have 90% damage reduction most of the time on this build, in my experience, the way I play it. But something to think about. I did also find Arcane Aegis very useful on this build, although this is just kind of an overpowered arcane in general at the moment. If it activates, you become pretty much unkillable for its duration. So I'm not really sure, it has synergy if you're going to go adaptation, but with what we just did, that doesn't really make sense. Right, so that's one build, and what I wanted to highlight about that is that, I often try to approach build crafting the frames by including as much stuff as possible in them. And this is a lot of the stuff that Equinox can do. We've used Metamorphosis, Rest, Mend and Maim, and then replaced the remaining ability. So, I mean, Rage, like, again, we dump Strength, so that's kind of bad. But you're often only going into day form to activate Duality and pop off Maim. Then you reactivate it and go back into night form. So this uses like a lot of Equinox's kit. It uses everything in Equinox's kit except Rage and Peaceful Provocation. Well, Pacify and Provoke. Pacify makes enemies do less damage, and Peaceful Provocation makes Nightform Pacify slow enemies. If this is charged up, it is practically impossible for enemies to hurt you in any meaningful way. The problem with that is that makes it impossible to charge up. Combat Discipline does tiny amounts of damage to you, which will eventually get it charged up. This makes Equinox very, very tanky. In night form, you just camp night form and you're very tanky. In fact, I actually replaced the Metamorphosis so you can't accidentally swap yourself out of the only form that keeps you alive. The only thing that gets this build killed is if you have charged up Peaceful Provocation and you accidentally hit Metamorphosis, you lose it, and then you're naked and you die. As long as that doesn't happen, you're good to go. So I put my Helminth ability over Nightform Equinox. Now I also made a fashion frame that is dedicated to Nightform Equinox specifically, so I don't like how this version looks, but this is the Nightform version, which I think looks really nice. Then we've got, Dayform. I think that looks a bit clunky, but you will never see that because you're locked into Nightform. You start in Nightform and then you're locked into it. So that's the thing I'm doing. You have to see the half version here, but I think that's fine. And that's it. Rage is an ability I had untapped in this case. But I don't think it's that great. I just don't think it's that good. Another thing is that Rest and Rage is Equinox's Helminth ability, so you can put it elsewhere. Rage is, potentially interesting to like speed enemies up or something. And it's not, in theory, a bad way to make enemies take more damage. You just kind of have to cast it a lot. Like, why not boost your own damage instead? But it's a very good value. It starts at a good amount and then it scales well. Comparing to something like Roar, you might do more damage to enemies with this, but you're going to have to cast it much more often. So anyway, I don't really care about making a build for Rage on Equinox, and that's why. And again, I just think that Provoke is pretty underwhelming, except when supporting a team, which is outside the purview of my Buildcraft series. It's an interesting idea, just not something I have anything to say about. I don't have someone I play Warframe with like that. But it sounds like it'd be pretty cool if you did. There's some good YouTube videos, Right, so I only say those to give us a starting point. You can see, all right, I was maybe a little excited to talk about Equinox Buildcraft stuff because I have a lot to say about Equinox stuff. Now, I consider Equinox a little bit solved. Like, I have searched my mind and failed to come up with more things that I feel like even would be good if there was a build that had as many payoffs as these do. So I would be very curious to hear what you all have to say and to tweak the Helminth abilities, to tweak those builds, since we've gotten a lot of new build tools between now and then, which is what we should do now. Just going to catch up on chat a little bit more while we look at this psychedelic angel fashion that I made for the Peaceful Provocation build. I wish Rest could be Helminthed onto Rest and Rage, so you could use Rest in day form too. That's an interesting thought. Yeah, when you Helminth Rest and Rage, you only get one or the other, but it'd be kind of interesting if you could Helminth like the wrong forms version of Rest and Rage onto the other. I do think that day form's big thing is like they're just so defenseless. I often come back to this idea that very few frames in Warframe lack some kind of like a layer of damage reduction or some like hard way to defend themselves, not just spamming crowd control all the time, because the one time an enemy shows up at level 100 on the Steel Path and you haven't spammed crowd control nonstop for 5 minutes, you will instantly die to that enemy if you have no damage reduction. So personally, I don't feel that crowd control is really ever an acceptable way to stay alive. That's a playstyle thing. You decide for yourself. But most Warframes, nearly all Warframes, have some tool by which you don't need to. They either have a layer of damage reduction you can build off of, maybe unusually high health, or they have some way to negate damage, or they are just invisible all the time. And Dayform Equinox is one of the only frames in the game that doesn't. It just doesn't have anything. Banshee would be like another example. Again, it's not that these forms are impossible to survive as, or even maybe difficult to survive as. They just kind of require different measures. Anyway. And it's also true that the new Xmas units, as Ragnavar says, kind of nail that home. I don't think it was untrue before, but if you were trying to survive by just CCing the entire universe, perhaps by like camping one location, you could have survived that way a little bit. But now that the new Xmas units have some immunity to those CC effects, that is driven home as a design intention for how the game is built. They clearly want that to be a difficulty, or they wouldn't have designed an enemy like that, which I don't think is a problem. Again, 95% of all the Warframe builds you could possibly make have some kind of innate solution to that, but there are still 5% is a couple that don't, and that is not necessarily a problem, but I do think Dayform Equinox is one of them. Right, so we could just talk about these builds a little bit more. Mr. Foot recommended using Arcane Avenger on this build because combat discipline can trigger it. And that is a that is a hotfix, baby. That is a lot of free crit. It's always been a little bit unclear to me whether Avenger was like meant to trigger when you subtract health from yourself, but it's worked for a very long time, so please just keep that in mind if you use this. I have it, so it costs me nothing to include, and I do think this is indeed a very good addition to this build. You have a pretty solid reason to use combat discipline. Again, just steadily building up pre-soul provocation. What will happen is that you'll get into a longer mission, like maybe 20-30 minutes or an hour. You'll activate this at the beginning, and enemies will be so incapable of harming you that it will never get charged for like an hour. And then eventually enemies will do enough damage that you need it charged to defend yourself against them, but it just won't be, and you'll get destroyed by like one attack. If this is charged up with a bit of strength, enemies are so slow that you're basically invulnerable. They can barely even move. It's to the point where it doesn't even matter if they could shoot you and one-shot you because they won't be able to get the shot off. They're 5 times slower than normal, like they're glacial. It feels like they're frozen. It's also worth noting that this it's stronger when you're closer to enemies. So you do want to get moving. Something that I've liked on a build like this a lot is adding something like Lightning Dash. Just a bullet jump mod or some kind of parkour increase to get you in closer to enemies faster. Also really like shotguns on this type of build. So go figure. Just to quickly circle back to the Avenger and combat discipline thing. There's 2 things that make it kind of unclear to me. This doesn't say you take damage, it just says you lose health. There are also other things that we tested, it was a while ago, like a few years ago, that are similar, like they subtract health from you, that didn't trigger Arcane Avenger at the time, as I recall. And so that's why it was a bit confusing. Like the verbiage is always unclear in Warframe, like that's just always a problem. But there are other places where things that subtract health from you, rather than like explicitly doing damage to you, don't trigger Arcane Avenger, but this does. So it is unclear the way the game is written, but I don't think it's like a stretch to think that this is intended. Again, this is just a weak point of Warframe. We will really never know these things, so you should just measure the cost to you. If you have Arcane Avenger and you have combat discipline, and here they are, and you don't even need to like forma or anything, there's really no cost to like maybe this will eventually break. To me, it's frustrating because it feels like maybe it will randomly get changed at some point, and one day, years from now, I'll play this build and this won't work, and I probably just won't notice, you know? But in that case, I guess that means I don't need it, right? So I don't know. What are you gonna do? This build has Spellbind Harvest, which is a really powerful energy generating ability, and I have this because it's really good with low duration and high range. You can't recast Spellbind when enemies are spellbound, but the low duration makes it end almost as quickly as it started. You cast it on a group of, so you need to hit 4 enemies, and you gain a lot of energy. It scales with strength, the amount of energy you gain. So if I hit 4 enemies for 16 energy, I gain 97 energy. And then it ends in 2 seconds. So I can just do it again, and again, and again, and again. And again, Spellbind's default duration is rather high. You really need a build that wants to have full negative duration, or that doesn't really work quite as well. But this build has a reason why it doesn't really care about that. Pacify and Provoke don't have their drain affected by duration for whatever reason. Again, Avenger is additive flat crit, right? So Kuva Nukor will work really well as a weapon for it. Yeah, if we have a really accessible way to gain a lot of flat critical chance, which this is, a very, very, very easy, almost automatic way to practically always have flat critical chance. You just get 45%. It doesn't modify what the weapon has. It's not like multiplying the base crit. You just add 45%. Yep, we're gonna have to relog. That's really, really good with stuff like Kuva Nukor. There's actually quite a few other weapons, some of which I will try to highlight now. One of them is the Bosmu. The Bosmu has a second firing mode where it fires this like lock-on beam thing, and it also has a really, really high critical multiplier, crazy like the Kuva Nukor critical multiplier, but very low crit chance. So this is another one. I think the Bosmu is a nice weapon in general. Obviously, Kuva Nukor is a crazy pants example of a similar thing. I'm going to use this opportunity to break, because we are getting interrupted by pop-ups like every third of a second. But yeah, then after that we could play this build and then possibly move on to the duality, mend and maim one. It's possible that this will be more of a framework where I talk about a build I made. We make some minor changes. I think there are more changes to make, and that's the show, and that's fine. But if there is another use for Equinox that you're excited about, I would love to hear about it. So please don't hesitate to bring that up. Now, before we break, I want to take a moment to freak out the camera and thank some new follows and subscribers. Which in this case is Sunrise, So Much to Win, and Mog. Thank you for the recent subs. I hope you enjoy your time in the gun ports of the Zandy vessel. This is a great way to support the stream. I do this for a living, so without some of that support, I will eventually have to stop doing this. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. I know for a lot of you, it's your one Prime sub and you picked me, and that's very kind. Others of you, you're paying the $5, and that is also really, really thoughtful, so thank you. I also got a few follows while I was out. Specifically, Yuzzy and Sisjus are new folks that I do not recall the names of. So thanks to the follows. Welcome aboard. Glad to have you. And with that, I'll talk to y'all in a few. Behold my Twitch ARRchive Parley segment, where I answer questions from people who watch previous streams as a way to entertain you while I hit the restroom during today's show. So this is Past Zandy here. I'll be your host for the next few minutes. And today we have one question from Heavy Breathing Cat. Heavy Breathing Cat asks, how much conscious effort would you say you put toward breathing? Rhythm games like Dance Dance Revolution are sometimes known to encourage players to not blink or breathe for several minutes straight. The Parley author, so Heavy Breathing Cat, also has the questionable habit of not breathing while climbing stairs, and it's his wheeze in 2 stars. A little wheeze was written in. How much do I think about breathing? So for me, it's always been one of those things where this is an odd Parley question. It's always been one of those things for me where if you start thinking about it, suddenly, not really, but you feel like you can't do it automatically anymore. So if I notice my breath in, out, suddenly I feel like I have to do it manually, or I like can't do it automatically anymore, which is not a thing, of course. Or if it is, you should probably consult a medical professional. That could be dangerous. I'm sure that that is a problem for some people. Yes. Yeah, no, generally not a lot. Although I do fiddle with my breathing quite a bit. Breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth, or the other way, or just through your mouth, or just through your nose. Yeah, those are things that I do pretty deliberately. That is something I fiddle with a lot. I tend to really micro-correct my behaviors when I see my body doing something. I tend to fiddle with it. All right, like maybe more than most people, but I feel like the spirit of the question is like in general, how much effort do you put toward breathing? And the answer is yeah, like I think like most people, none, 95% of the time. But yeah, okay, me maybe more than some people I imagine don't do this and fiddle with themselves like this. Uh, anyway, you know what I'm trying to say. And yeah, I don't know. I'm not really sure. Like relative to other people, what does that mean? But that's what I do. I don't know. Maybe chat can be a very poor, but still some sample size, and provide us with some input. On with the show. And above decks, for just a few more thank yous to the folks that are supporting the show. That's DerpyTW. Thank you for being my most recent patron. You actually increased your pledge. I'm really looking forward to your Twitch archive parlay questions, if you choose to use them. And also to your parlay video that you get to request once a month that will be on my Pantaloon Saloon channel. And thank you to Audio Forces for the totally crazy, extremely generous tips. A 138 total tip amount, which was done in two $69 tips. $138 is twice $69. Nice. Thank you very much. You've been extremely generous, Audio Forces, and I'm glad we're having a little bit of fun with the exact amount that you tipped as well. Now, folks, with that, I need to patch the game, which means you're going to have to look at my face for a little bit. Let's do that. Should be fairly quick, and I'll catch up on chat a bit more. Yes, about our Peaceful Provocation Equinox in Night form, kind of a tank that is going to make enemies so feeble as to take practically no damage from them when close to them. Mr. Fruit was mentioning some stuff about weapons. We've got the ones, Please One Time mentioned the additive crits, so Avenger is going to make Kuva Nukor and like the Bosmu Beam thing, and the weapons with very good crit damage but low crit chance. Those are going to be really good, sure. We have a very, very reliable access to that with Combat Discipline. And then the Zymos. So Mr. Foot says, headshots are easy with the amount of slow you have, and the secondary projectiles have high crit chance and crit damage. Yeah, weapons that reward you heavily for getting a big headshot are really good when you have such a power. I mean, you got to see this slow effect. We'll go into a mission and I'll show you. It is trivially easy to get headshots with even a hilariously inaccurate weapon. And as Mr. Food, I actually didn't know that. The Zymos explosion projectiles have good crit stats for us to boost with Avenger, or good crit damage at least. That's awesome. Both directions of big damage. That's sick. I love something like the Zymos because you can make, like Kuva Nukor and Arcane Avenger and Combat Discipline too. Like you could do that on any build, but Combat Discipline is a little better on this build because it's fueling Peaceful Provocation, and Peaceful Provocation is slowing enemies down for the Zymos. So that's all a little bit better in this case, which for me, somebody who wants some variety, that's really exciting. Like that's cool. So yeah, I can get down with doing the Zymos. Let me look at that. Let's look at these stats. What an ugly weapon, am I right? I actually don't like the skin I put on it though. Like, let's see. Let me just give it to me in all its glory, Oh, just glorious. Anyway, if you haven't seen this weapon explode all over people, it's really something to watch. The secondary projectiles, do they have stats that don't really happen? Ragnavar, it's just loading. It takes a little while for it to swap over. The stream software's detecting of the thing. Doesn't swap over so quickly. But yeah, you can see it maybe doesn't list some of the secondary projectile explosions. I'm just gonna look up if the wiki says like, oh, there are different stats for like a different part of it. There are so many different parts of this weapon's damage. That's insane. But yeah, they have 2.3x, and the weapon's crit chance is bad. This weapon's upfront damage, like the raw damage this weapon does, is really high though. So in theory, I think that's pretty exciting. Now that this is in any way a problem, but I think you would want to build it specifically for Equinox here. I wasn't using this weapon for other stuff particularly often, so that's fine. We'll run Target Cracker if I can find room for it. Oh, sorry, I meant Galvanized Diffusion, not Galvanized Shot. But not Pistol Gambit. The base crit chance is just so low, and we're going to get the crit from Avenger. But this will make the damage much higher. And then what do we got? Electricity Viral. That sounds fine. Primed Fulmination? Room for Primed Fulmination? Alms for the Poor? Primed Fulmination? No. I feel like that makes a pretty big difference. Maybe we just format this really quick. Oh, that'll take 2 seconds. Come on. It's a pretty big difference in explosion radius. And then the Bosmu, I wanted to use that. Can we put in... Oh yeah, I have crit chance and crit damage for the normal build, and then the crit chance mod doesn't do much for the beam, but we already have the crit damage mod, so that's just as well. That's fine. I'll just use my normal Bosmu build, weapon I use quite a bit. Yeah, and we'll just play it while we level it up. It, you know, it should be pretty quick if we do like ESO or something, and that'll just demonstrate the level of slow and how, you know, it's not going to charge up, especially in ESO. But combat discipline will help. Hopefully that'll demonstrate that pretty well. Let's companion and focus. What are we doing for those? I'm also going to look at the mods again, but we got to pick companion and focus stuff. Here, I wanted to come back to this because I want to include Umbral, Intensify, and Vitality. There really isn't a reason not to. We do want Transient Fortitude. You remember the whole thing about Spellbound Harvest, and you can recast it to gain a bunch of energy if the duration wears off, so minimum duration is actually good here, and it doesn't make Peaceful Provocation more expensive, because this is a weird skill. So I guess you could cut Blind Rage, and then cut Streamline, and then you could replace that with... Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to have space now, but you could add your Umbral Intensify and your Umbral Vitality there. I'm just kind of planning out, you know, if I like that, I'll forma for it. We could do an Aura forma. Yeah. Or do I want to put an Umbral forma? See, we need these forma for this build. This is one of the few cases where I might get backed into a corner. Folks following along with the stream might know I have never made like another Warframe for a build. I've never needed to do that. I think the situation where you like would truly need to do that is really rare in theory. Rather than just want to do that, there'd be multiple builds that you truly benefit from, that you're truly using all the time, and you need more space. I feel like that should be rare, but folks have said they do it from time to time, so maybe I'll get backed into a corner here. What's Lightning Dash? I don't remember it. There's a cycle of elemental bullet jump mods. It gives you 25% bullet jump, aim glide, wall latch goodness, and you also do like a status effect of that element when you bullet jump, so in this case is electricity. That one's nice. The Firewalker, the heat one, is pretty nice. In fact, maybe I'll do Firewalker in this case. And there are other ones for Toxin and Cold, which I don't think are like particularly amazing, but Chilling... What's the cold one? Ice Spring. Ice Spring. Classic. Everybody knows the mod Ice Spring. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I'm surprised they even had that, actually. Anyway, for now, I'll put back on the mods I had, but I'm probably going to put the Umbral Vitality and Steel Fiber, Intensify on here, because I feel like this build makes use of them. What was here? Uh-oh. I don't remember what that was. What was this mod? I do not know. Vitality, thank you, of course. Yes. Welcome back. Thank you, Sai. I'm glad you enjoyed them. Yeah, I'm not really happy with how Framework was coming out, so we've been streaming a new version of it every week. We're going through all the frames in alphabetical order, starting with we started, at A with Ash, and I'm skipping frames that haven't been primed, not because prime frames are better, but simply because I don't want to form them again, and I care about the fashion. So we went through Ash, Atlas, Banshee, Chroma, Ember, and now we're at Equinox. We're doing this every Thursday for it's gonna be a while. And now we're in Equinox, and so yeah, I in Equinox's case, I do have builds that I already have a lot I want to say about, but there's more to develop on them. There's been new build tools added to the game, and I also want your input on them. That's one reason among many, that I didn't love the previous framework. It also, like, we would do a live version that had good stuff in it, but then make it into videos that didn't have that good stuff, which it just feels like a shame to me. I don't know. And so we're here. But yeah, so one idea that Mr. Foot has was using the Zymos. The enemies are really slow because of Peaceful Provocation, so it's really easy to get the headshot, and this weapon does kind of lack crit chance. So a build that has a good reason and easy access to Arcane Avenger, which this build does, with combat discipline, is a good fit for a weapon like the Zymos. And yeah, like Kuvanukor, of course, that's good on a bunch of builds. Kuvanukor is good even without enabling its crit chance. And the Bosmu secondary fire also has really, really good crit damage. It's very much like a primary Kuvanukor. Really, really good damage if you enable the crits. So we shall. And so right now I want to fiddle with the mods a little bit, so I put an Aura Forma on, and we'll be building up on that. But I got to pick what focus and companion, and I guess a heavy weapon. You have an awful lot of time to deploy it. I keep not defaulting to putting the Mausolon on builds, which I think is bad. That's bitten me in the butt a few times. But we could talk about the heavy weapon if people have things to say. Mostly companion and focus are what we need to pick. Enemies are slow. Get good weapon damage. We're getting close. Going for big bongo headshots. Don't really need resources that bad. Obviously, the Panzerville Pfeila would always be fine. But something that's unique about Weak Equinox, as I call her, is that, Peaceful Provocation, Pacify, this makes enemies very bad at hurting everyone, not just you. So this is a really, really good companion for very vulnerable companions that would be difficult to keep alive, but have some benefit, like a doggo that was just going to die or whatever, but they have some great benefit if they stay alive. Maybe a Predacite, for example. Might not be the worst place for some Kubros. I just don't feel like we need like the energy particularly, or the stealth at all. Maybe a Hound, maybe. Still have to get into my head like what I feel like the Hounds actually do. I picked a few specific things, but they're actually kind of good at staying alive. Diversified Denial is useful for that. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I kind of want like a vulnerable companion that does some like commensurate good value, like a Bruiser maybe. What's that one? There's a Predacite that is like a combat brawler. It's not this one. It's Minotaur, maybe? Yeah, this one. I've been rather impressed, especially if you build for Mecha Overdrive. This gives your companion status chance based on your primary weapon's status chance, which can be quite high. That can be really good. Now, it does encourage us to pick a weapon that like maybe won't have that weird crit damage to abuse with Arcane Avenger, but that's okay. So for now, we'll just see if I feel like the damage is respectable. We'll give it all the help it needs, And Kubicomb, the way this weapon's status chance is calculated makes it have numerically very high status because it kind of ramps up the pellets. It doesn't show the status like per pellet, which leads to this like gloriously high. The Kubro has 123% status chance and always procs slash with a 43% chance to crit for 10 times damage. This will one-shot armored enemies on the steel path if it crits. Excellent. But again, very vulnerable. Wouldn't normally be a companion I would love. So yeah, let's try that. Again, I'm mostly going to fight with this, and we're just going to hold this for the companion. So Mr. Poot, we're just, we're battening down the hatches on weak Equinox, and then we're going to get in there and do some big damage. Now, there is a little bit of anti-synergy with the dogs. As Bastards mentions, like, we have a very good reason not to build the whole mecha set. The other two mecha mods are Warframe mods. One's an aura and one gives you armor, both of which don't benefit this build literally at all. So that is losing a bit of the potential of the build. It doesn't mean it's bad, but if you had a companion in mind that wasn't a Kubro and was super vulnerable, I don't know, like that exists, like a Moa, sort of, maybe, kind of, a little, not a lot. They're not terrible at defending themselves. They don't do a horrible amount of damage either. I'm gonna put on Burgless. Yeah, anyway, we don't have to worry about the companion too much. But yeah, I agree. I think that the dog synergy is, it's a bit of a stretch. It's not a perfect fit. There's a lot of good things about Kubros that do not fit very well into this build, mostly the mecha set. So that's a bit of a shame. What focus? What focus do we want? So the energy, I think we need to check whether Zeneric Wellspring still works with Pacify. Has a very weird way of draining energy, which often works with abilities that it like normally wouldn't. So let's look at that. I think that's a good place to start. We're gonna do a defense. Mr. Fruit, I did mod the Zymos to add some crit damage. I added a prime target cracker specifically for this build since we're hoping to have Arcane Avenger active most of the time. Otherwise, it's just like it's a status focused build, of course. I didn't build crit chance. I'll pop it back up when we get out of here. Beginning of the mission, we'll activate Peaceful Provocation. You can see the Peaceful Provocation part, which is the slow, is at 0%. So it's not slowing enemies yet. For that to happen, enemies need to do damage to us, which will not happen because we've activated this. Instead, we're going to need to get them killed. There we go. Now we're taking some damage. Arcane Avenger activated. There's the pretty big bongo damage from the beam form Bosmu with crits. Not bad, right? And you get the lifesteal when it reloads. That's kind of neat. It's nice. Yatagami, welcome back. How you doing? We are doing some testing. Want to use the Zymos maybe, since enemies are going to be so slow because of Peaceful Provocation. Get some big juicy headshots. We do also have some things to enable it. Because we got host migration, I lost all my charge for Peaceful Provocation, but don't worry, that means we'll get some back really, really quick. Arcane Avenger is active. That's pretty consistent so far. Pretty spicy damage. Give me the... Hey, enemies. Charge me. Give me Avenger. And I like the Bosmu too, right? Because, like, you won't always have Avenger active, so then you have a weapon that, like, does okay damage if you don't have that. You know, when Avenger is down, you still have, like, a good weapon. So that's kind of a good fit. That appeals to me. You may want more or less combo frame with your Happy Meal. Yeah, see, like, that was the beam without the crit. Is it pretty big bongo or pretty big bongo damage. Pretty big bongo. Big bongo is a single descriptor, and it's a lot of that. It's not pretty big, and then bongo damage. It's not bongo damage, it's big bongo damage. Very good question. No more questions, please. No, I'm just kidding. Yes, please, more questions. Where it's because of the Strangle Dome, but like where even are the remaining enemies? Found one. So also, you know, it's probably a good thing to mention the something that often comes up when you have a build that slows enemies, which is that sometimes it can be really bad to slow enemies. Something to keep in mind with this build is that it's not like a huge radius the way I have it built, and you do have to be closer to enemies for them to get slowed a lot. So if I'm here, enemies kind of have to be in range of the cryopod to be slowed, meaning it won't slow down the mission too much, but that is something to keep in mind. A lot of Warframe missions are not a matter of succeeding, but succeeding faster, and making enemies slower can make you succeed. You were always going to pass the mission, but then you just win slower, you know? And so that's something to keep in mind as well. The way I said that seemed like such a subtle burn, but anyway, I hope you get what I'm trying to say. I do also agree that I think Strangle Dome is like a really cool idea for an ability that it does not fit the game Warframe very well. It makes it very difficult to kill enemies with a large variety of weapons and playstyles, which is not good design. I do think that's a mistake. I think that an interesting solution could be to simply let all damage echo through all of Strangle Dome as long as enemies are grabbed by it. That sounds a bit overpowered. It's going to be, you know, limited by enemies being able to be grabbed by Strangle Dome and also by the radius of Strangle Dome. You could make Strangle Dome have worse range too to balance that. So that's an idea. I'm not too confident that that's a good idea, but that's something. Another thing you could do is have it not grab enemies. It could just sort of fire out, you know, tendrils or chains at them that move with them as they walk, and maybe they get disarmed, like it grabs their weapon and prevents them from shooting, but doesn't physically lift them into the air, something like that. So it could disable them just as much without like lifting them off the ground. You could limit the enemies it grabs to a set number. You could make it so if enemies are in Strangle Dome for like a minute, they just die. In fact, for all I know, that could already be a mechanic. Maybe that's not a good enough fix. But anyway, those are some thoughts. Those are some feels. Yeah, Takami, I'm feeling the heat here too. My office is very hot. A lot of Warframes, by comparison, look either like they would be nice and cool, or like it would be way too hot inside of the effectively bodysuit that they appear to be wearing. Oh. Delicious. Yeah, the Arcane Avenger Bosmu damage is pretty satisfying. It's been difficult to demonstrate Zymos big money headshots. So that's what the explosion looks like, but you can see it didn't have the crit, so the damage is kind of lacking. We're going to try to do it with Avenger active, which is going to be hard because of Strangle Dome, but what are you going to do? Oh. No? Okay. You just died. That's fine. That's acceptable. Okay. You were on death's door anyway. A satisfying weapon to get a hit with, though. Hearing the little, like... Or... the explosion when it hits is awesome. You know, the Warframe sound design team won an award recently, and rightly so, I think. It's just awesome, like, so much of the time. Bodysuit, or are most of them just naked? That's a thought. I mean, you know, the Warframe lore aside, how do they look is really the question here. And a lot of them just look naked, that's true. You could have Strangle Dome echo damage, but shrink like Cataclysm as it strangles the enemies within. That's a cool idea. Yeah, like it it ties the enemies up more and more, and eventually they get, you know, like strangled from a thematic perspective. That's a neat idea. That's an elegant solution, I think. I like that. Makes it feel thematic still. A different approach of the to the idea of enemies getting strangled. Like, this makes me think that they're caught in a bunch of chains or in a web, but there are other ways you could achieve that design language. So that's a cool suggestion. Yeah. I find it fun to suggest things with you all. I find that you folks are generally pretty good-natured about, like, it can be very frustrating design, you know. I think we can all relate to, like, it's a bit frustrating when it feels like the mission is just, like, looking to find the enemies stuck in Strangledome. But I felt that that was offset by all of you giving, like, really targeted, positive, really pretty decent advice. It's difficult always to get right. The game developers would have more work to do if they were to implement these things. But, you know, these are reasonable ideas, and I calmly present it. I really admire that. I often talk about you folks like my children a little bit, which I do not wish to have children, but maybe this is part of why. That's not true. I've always felt like that, but there's when I say pridefulness, you know, only because I have the great pleasure of spending my afternoons with you folks 3 times a week. So, anyway, I appreciate it. It really does mean a lot. Like, I had an absolutely terrible day today, and this is nearly always one of the better parts of it. So, I really appreciate that. Yeah, on a sillier note, going back to what Asymptomatic is saying, Strangledome currently, in my mind, has a design language that, like, this is ridiculous, but it looks a bit too fun, you know? Like, it looks like it might be sort of enjoyable to be in Strangledome. I would like to highlight something, by the way, since we were, in theory, testing out this Equinox thing this whole time. So, Peaceful Provocation has been charging. I've taken practically no damage for the past, you know, maybe 10 minutes, right? But we have Combat Discipline active. Just there at the end, after that whole mission while we were fighting, I did fully charge Peaceful Provocation. So enemies were getting that 80% slow. That, for perspective, is about how long that takes when you do it that way. But it does work. It doesn't do it quickly, but it means that when you get to the point where enemies are literally just not hurting you, you reach a stasis where you will eventually charge it up all the way. So I thought that was a good, as much as that mission was not necessarily long, actually a pretty good demonstration of why this can be useful. So if it didn't make sense, like, that just seems like an incredibly small amount of charge on Peaceful Provocation. It is, but that was an example of that working. We didn't need it yet. If the mission had scaled longer, we would have been thankful to have that big, huge slow. However, the build requires a hotter testbed. Does it not? Oh, excuse me. I'll use this opportunity to quickly show Mr. Fruit you'd asked what was on the Zymos. And here's what's on it right now. Electricity. The hope is that enemies will electricity and hurt each other in the explosion area. And then viral, yeah, viral. Have more electricity, because I think that could be quite good here. Like, you want the electricity, and then viral, like, because viral, it's a very good universal damage multiplier. Prime Fulmination, this is what I would have built normally, and then I have on Prime Target Cracker, because we're giving it Arcane Avenger to increase the crit chance, which is normally very low. The crit damage is fine, a little higher than average, actually. The raw damage of this weapon is really high, because it has no, like, real crit stats it can use. But we have the technology, so in theory could be really good. Yes, okay. Let's try, like, a not like that mission. We got, like, a... But this won't let us test, like, the damage output. Anyway, it's fine. I can still get used to, like, Arcane Avenger uptime. That's alright. And we are kind of leveling this stuff up, too. No big deal. Oh yeah, wait, do we have tractor beam? Do we? Or am I just hallucinating that? No, I'm crazy. Dude, we don't have tractor beam. What's going on? I was like floating kind of funny, wasn't I? Am I tripping out, folks? With this psychedelic angel. People are talking about fulmination not being very powerful on the Buzmoo because most of the damage comes from the projectiles and not the explosion. I will have to try both ways. I do want to say that I think if fulmination isn't that powerful, I don't know if I'd build a crit chance because you just get so little with the weapon's low base crit. I would probably, in that case, be more inclined to build like maybe more base damage or biasing it more toward electricity if possible, or something like that, you know, improving the handling just because some crit chance would do so little. But then, not a porpoise, you're saying the apparently double dips with crit chance and crit damage because it goes through like 2 layers. Like the projectile and the explosion or something. That's interesting. Again, mechanics like that, it's always kind of hard. Like, is that going to be patched out and we won't find it buried in the patch notes in like 3 months? Or is that an intended mechanic or unintended, but it will be left in? It's, you know, who can say? So that can be a bit unclear. Mr. Fruit, you did mention earlier that you thought the crit chance. We've been talking a lot about the Zymos today. I like this weapon. It's interesting. It's like so unwieldy, but it's so glorious when you get the hit. I really like this weapon. I think it's sort of bad, but really, really fun. And it has potential. Like on paper, it's not terrible. You just have to enable it. It's one of those weapons. It's, you know, it's upfront a bit worse, but if you enable it, it could be better. But yeah, there is some like design lack of clarity there. I feel like the explosion seems okay. You know, these enemies are too low level for the damage to matter, but the AoE of the explosion seems kind of good. Anyway. Ah. Anyway, sorry, I was saying I did check the wiki about the crit chance of the projectiles, and as far as I could tell, they are all the same. There isn't like a different part of the damage that has like much higher crit chance. I might have read that wrong. I was distracted streaming, but I'm not sure. That could be a thing, but that wasn't clear to me when I checked. But yeah, something to look into. Building it with crit may be better than it looks like it is. Yachigami, I indeed have not played Angels of the Zeraman. I would say don't send me the weapon blueprints for now because I plan to play it soon, and I wouldn't have time to level them anyway before then. But it's thoughtful of you to ask. Yeah, it's been a bad 2 weeks. Part of it has been really good. I wish I could tell you more about that, but I don't kiss and tell, as they say. But the other stuff has been really bad. So it's been a roller coaster. You all have been great as a way to wind down from that a bit. I do have bad news for those of you following along with the stream so far. You know, I had those aligners in my mouth, and I finally finished that set of aligners after 10 months. Well, they didn't tell me, but I need to do another 3 months for a correction. That's a big problem for me. I had some strong words with the person at the clinic. I feel that they sort of don't acknowledge that it's extremely inconvenient to, like, that dramatically transforms 3 months of my life. You can't just say, oh, there are 13 more. Like, what are you saying? That's crazy. That would be, it's like saying that I'm going to have a surgery. Like, from my perspective, it impacts work. You can't, I need to know if you're going to do that. And I know they can't know exactly how many, right? But they, I don't really feel they made the effort. They, you know, I asked a lot of times, like, what's going to happen after, and they just use a bunch of jargon, and repeatedly I asked, and they did not clarify. That was very frustrating. That's not why the whole 2 weeks has been stressful in a bunch of ways. But that it's just something frustrating. You know, it's hard, right? I think that it's connected weirdly to this whole thing we're talking about like the Zymos crit. So why doesn't it just say in game? Like, why doesn't the game just say what all of the different parts of the damage stats are? Warframe's gotten better at this. There have been parts of Warframe where that wasn't a thing that the game did well, that it now does do a lot better. But there are still many parts of the game that have stats that the developers are not like trying to hide from you or something, but the game just doesn't say what they are. Or parts of abilities that aren't in the tooltip, and the tooltip is short, whereas other abilities have very long, very thorough tooltips, and there isn't really a lot of rhyme or reason for us as the players toward like why, you know, like what is the reasoning behind, you know, like having some somewhere but not other places. But it's interesting, right? Like, just like with my orthodontist, from a design perspective, a lot of your players don't care, like don't want to know, would even be overwhelmed, or even worse, turned off from making a build in the game. That was big damage. Did you see that one? If you pummeled them with all of that information. So there is a balance to be struck, right? Like it is very challenging. It's always challenging, even in games where I feel like Warframe is unusually bad at this. This is a weakness of Warframes. If you wanted to criticize Warframe, you would look here. So it feels a bit unfair, but what are you going to do? It is a bad thing about the game, I think. I don't think Warframe is very good at this. I think Warframe's verbiage is just very weak. I think that's something that they could do a lot better with. But this is hard in games that are good at that. Like, it's always hard, knowing exactly how much damage to show the player. Games that have a lot more of the information in-game, like I think Path of Exile does a really good job, those games are, maybe it's because of this and maybe not, perceived as being pretty inaccessible by a lot of the community, the gaming community at large. That might not be because of that, but who knows? It's hard to believe it doesn't help, you know? So it's hard to strike a balance there. And again, like my orthodontist probably just thought I didn't care what was happening with my teeth. They thought it's one less thing for me to worry about, but I run my own business. It's my job to worry about that stuff. So anyway, I just think that's kind of interesting. It's always important to note that people neglecting putting in information isn't just negligence. It is unknowable what the best amount of information would be. I think that's a fascinating part of game design. I do want to say I think that the trend has been toward developers putting more of the information into the game. I feel like it is the case that compared to like 20 years ago, it's much more common that games that have a lot of information that you could look up in a wiki have that information in the game nowadays, with better and better interfaces too. So for what it's worth, I'm not saying that means that's a correct trend. There have been times when something like that happened, but then, you know, we backtracked. But yeah. P-Bear, no problem at all. Not interrupting. Awfully polite of you to say. This is Equinox. This is with the deluxe skin and a bunch of cosmetics, so it looks very different than any other frame. Pio, I play a couple different Equinox builds, so I tried to make this Equinox look aggressively different, like a completely different Warframe from the other. So I am to blame for you not recognizing her. But this is the deluxe skin, not the prime skin. That's an important distinction. My other appearance is the prime skin. Piper, I will do my best to remember. How you doing? What's up? We were just in the middle of, we're doing a dry run of this Peaceful Provocation focus build. As you can see, when enemies get near, you see this guy right here. So really, really slow. But then if I back off a little bit, we'll get some enemies far away. Those enemies there, so I'll back off, they're really fast, and now I roll, and suddenly they like pause. You're seeing that difference in speed. And so the build has an incredibly powerful debilitating aura that makes enemies practically incapable of hurting anyone, as long as we're kind of close to them. Which makes the build really tanky as long as we get in close very quickly. Which is what the build is trying to do. And so then it becomes a matter of like, what awful thing are we going to do to these helpless enemies to kill them? And we've been using the Zymos. The Zymos has really bad accuracy and travel time, but if you bury it in an enemy's head, it does this ungodly putrid explosion that does tons and tons and tons of damage. Now, Peaceful Provocation only charges up when you take damage, which won't happen once you have it charged up. a little bit because enemies will be slowed so much. These enemies can barely move. They're not going to hurt me, at least not enough to charge it in a timely manner. So we've used Combat Discipline, which is an aura that heals your allies when they kill enemies, but hurts you when you kill enemies. That's actually good here because it will charge the aura very slowly. And we're quite safe from it killing us because enemies are so incapable of doing damage. The enemies are basically completely immobile, except for Xmas enemies, which can be the target of the damage. And you can see we can easily just pick them off. Now, Combat Discipline does a little damage to you. What that means is we can run... Oh. It ended. Glorious. Umbral Forma get. Combat Discipline does damage to you. That triggers Arcane Avenger, and that gives flat crit. So weapons like the Zymos that, they do good raw damage, but they have terrible accuracy, and they're kind of offset by having unreliable crit. We can fix that. And it fits into the build very elegantly. Anyway, we were already doing the stuff that enables Arcane Avenger. So it fits very neatly into the build. Yeah, so I feel like that's a lot of what there is to show about this build at the end of the day. As you saw, we're not really in danger of dying. I can definitely get behind, like, you could put Gloom or Creeping Terrify or something or whatever to just completely halt the AI. There are two things I want to note. They're already basically harmless, so I don't think that actually makes the build better. I think that would be fun, but I do not think that makes the build stronger. I think you're pretty much unkillable once this gets going. And remember that you also have rest. You could also just put them to sleep. So if you're going to cast another ability, Gloom would make it as an aura, so I can get behind that. Then about energy, I saw Well of Life could be used for energy and sets up a deep pool of health for repeated Zymos headshots. You could use Dispensary as well. I do want to note that in that footage, I had Spellbind and Spellbound Harvest, but I never needed it. I never used enough energy that I needed that. In fact, I also had Xenoric, but never used Wellspring. So I don't think this build needs energy very badly. It doesn't really do anything, for one thing. It doesn't really do anything to use the energy for. You could channel Mend and Maim, like you could keep Mend active really aggressively, but you don't really need the shields either. Anyway, you could do this lots of different ways. You could change the helmet ability for something else. But this is a simple version of it. It's working pretty well. So that's that. I don't think I have a lot else to say. If it gave you your own ideas about how to fiddle with a build like this, that's awesome. I do think that something like, like you could use Unairu to remove enemy armor for the Zymos explosions. I'm not sure that would always be necessary, but a Steel Path, it might feel really good. And enemies are so slow, you have a lot of time to just fiddle with them, as long as you'll make that up by killing them really quickly afterward. I did also want to mention Xenoric, of course, you have Temporal Shot. You can slow enemies with Temporal Drag, use your second ability. Big slow. I will quickly show you, or actually it's an 80% slow. Anyway, imagine they were 5 times slower than you saw when they were slowed, okay? Piper, thanks for the follow. Welcome aboard. Glad to have you. And speaking of which, Piper, I told you that I have a different Equinox appearance for a very different build, which we'll spend the end of today's show talking about. Well, we already talked about what's on the build, but this one is meant to, well, I wanted it to look good in both forms because I'm going to swap between forms. And here you can see it's using the Prime skin, and I added some armor, but it's not straying too far from the Prime skin. I just colored it pretty differently, and this is the build that is going to be charging Maim while in Knight form, using energy transfer. You get some shields when enemies die nearby. You can defend your squishy, in some ways, Equinox form. You don't have to charge it up in day form. You can charge it up in Knight form, where you have rest to put enemies to sleep if they aggress you. And we also get Metamorphosis Duality pretty much for free. We're already gonna swap into day form and explode enemies out of existence, and then swap back into Knight form to charge it up, spamming rest as we go. So Duality is just free, and it's not affected by strength, so you just get the 300% damage on your clone, which is real good. I'm going to keep myself alive with Pillage, which is also going to remove enemy armor, which makes it easier to kill them with Maim. that's the build. Pretty simple. This is one of those builds that is really powerful in ESO, so we might as well use it there, as long as the game will allow me to. I don't really know what companion I want to use here, or focus, so let's not worry about that just now. We'll head in. I thought I saw someone before mention that they like using Hyrudo on a build that would use rest for like a finisher. And I like that too. I had meant to circle back to that like, from time to time. That's a thing I've enjoyed. Let's just grab this catalyst because I'm not gonna have time to do this later. But yeah, we have a little while still, you know, maybe 20 minutes. Folks, if you're enjoying the show, we do this time every week. We'll be doing the next frame on the list alphabetically that's primed, which I think is Excalibur. Well, you know, Umbra, but it's the same thing. So next week we'll do Excalibur. If you have ideas for Excalibur stuff you want to talk about, bring those, because I want them. So we'll go Night Form to charge up Mend and Maim. Ow. Probably want to get Cautious Shot or the equivalent on this, because I keep staggering myself with the Zymos explosions. Yeah, like Helminth abilities for Excalibur, stuff like that. And tomorrow, I also stream on Fridays and Sundays. This Friday we're going to play Hades, if you'd like to see some Buildcraft in Hades. It is a game that is a lot easier to follow than Warframe. If you have not played it, the build will be made right before your eyes as we're playing, which I think makes for a really good show. It fits me and all of you, my lovely community, very well. So if you would be willing to take a chance on that, I think you will find that to be an entertaining 2-hour show tomorrow, same time as today. And on Sunday, we do Genshin Impact, another kind of ongoing Buildcraft game, but also a lot more crispy. It's much easier to understand what's going on for a layperson than Warframe. I think Genshin Impact has really elegant Buildcraft that I think the way most people treat the game, it makes it seem like it isn't very exciting Buildcraft, which I think is really a shame. There's a lot there. Really, really good quality over quantity in Genshin Impact, where you know, when you add something, when you change something on a build, it really makes a big difference. Each element contributes like a lot. There's a big change if you change one thing. I just think that's really good. That's desirable in a game with Buildcraft. Just gonna kill everything. Charge it back up. Swap back over. Beautiful. Again, this is too low a level for this build to have any difficulty with, but we're just leveling stuff up a little bit and getting the basics. A lot of people play most of their missions at this level, so it's, you know, anything will do, but this is how this will play. But yeah, anyway, so if you're interested in those, of course I have a schedule too, which you can check if you'd like. Another fun thing you can do with the clone, since we're talking about that, is that's a really cool idea. Let me get back to that. But a basic thing you can do, might be kind of obvious, but a basic thing you can do that I think is pretty fun is give the clone your heavy weapon. It'll use whatever weapon you have out, so the clone can just kind of like go off and mousel on some dudes. Not that heavy weapons are like particularly better or worse than other categories of weapon, which is sort of their flaw. I'm not sure it's really worth it, but looks pretty badass, you gotta admit. And with triple damage, and it takes the mods, ooh, like, I don't know that heavy weapons are so much stronger, but that's cool, right? I don't know. It gives you some flexibility. In particular, I think where that's more relevant is if your Equinox is holding weapons that you wouldn't want an AI to use, but like it's good for you, you can then have you can have an arc gun that would be good if the clone used it. You know, like some kind of auto weapon. The AI often behaves better. There is actually like kind of a practical use for that. So anyway, I think it's kind of cool. Like, I don't think it mostly matters, but that's kind of neat, right? It's a bit silly, but we're having a bit of fun here. This build does want a touch of energy, I think. And so that will be something we'll look at when you can see even at this low level, and in some ways actually even because of this low level, enemies are just evaporating before we can do meaningful damage. So it would be advantageous to bring some energy generation. I'd like to fit on natural talent since you do a lot of casting, but I wouldn't know what to drop. Well, sure, make a note of that. When we get out of this mission, we can talk about that. Sometimes I wish Nat Talent was an Exilus mod. Yeah, I love talking about this subject. The whole thing about, like, you know, a lot of people say, I really admire the way you worded it. A lot of people say, like, it just should be an Exilus mod. It's important to remember, of course, that that means it would be competing with the other Exilus mods, which may not put up much of a fight compared to Natural Talent on a lot of frames, which would make the slot completely worthless. If you're going to do that, you should just make Natural Talent innate and remove the Exilus slot, so we don't have to spend Forma and Exilus adapters on it. If there isn't a choice in the slot, it's not worth the slot existing in the game. But personally, I don't think that Natural Talent actually is too strong for the weapon Exilus, the Exilus slot. I just think people would think it was, which is its own slightly different problem. I just find that really interesting, so I'm happy you brought it up. I think it's one where the problem is actually people's perception. I don't think Natural Talent is actually that good on that many builds that I think are that good, but I'm not the objective standard for build quality, so who knows? I don't know. I think the developers are, and very rightly, thinking we shouldn't let them use Natural Talent because players think Natural Talent is too good. My point is simply that I don't think the players are correct about that, but what are you going to do? That's its own problem you'd have to solve. When you get around to the Zerum and stuff, I'd like to hear your take on the Incarnon weapon system. Yeah, it's been requested another time this stream as well. Folks seem really interested in that. I have had a busy few weeks, but it is something I'm very excited to see as well. I would hate for you all, and the developers, to think that I'm not really excited for all these new build tools. I, like, really, really am. It was an unusually busy week for me, and I do avoid playing releases right when they come out. But I do really want to get into that. I will make it a priority. Just because I want to, but also because you're interested. I did want to circle back. Also, Yatagami, you kindly offered the new arcanes. If you have all of the new arcanes and you want to give me them so that I can use them on builds, that would save me a huge amount of time, and I'm sure that I and everybody else would love that. I feel I should humbly accept that offer. That is incredibly generous. Of course, I can't rightly say no to that. No, I don't wish to say no to that. I don't entirely disagree, Mr. Poot, you know, about the weapon Exilus thing. Mr. Poot said, Premature-footed, Cunning Drift, and most augments are currently dominating the Exilus slot. I feel like Natural Talent is either on or slightly above the power level of those mods. And I agree with you. Again, my concern was more that I don't think most players, like, think that, which means they would literally just put the Natural Talent on every frame until it rotted off, which is its own problem. That doesn't mean they shouldn't do it. It probably means they should make Natural Talent an Exilus mod, and then do something about player perception that it really is so good, you know? Which they actually kind of have. The new Madurai focus tree has a node that increases your casting speed. You can get it from an additional place now, you know? I don't know, I feel that this is a larger problem with Warframe where you can't easily convince players that something isn't needed because nothing is needed, and so, like, quality of life rules the day, that kind of thing. And the game would have more meaningful choices if you actually needed more stuff. But I'm not really sure, like, that would require some pretty serious changes. I'm not really sure what to do about that. I just feel like that is the problem. I'm just not sure what the medicine is, you know? I'm very interested in this topic from a game design perspective. Being not entirely focused on Warframe makes this fun to discuss rather than, like, the worst thing about covering Warframe. If you had no choice but to only talk about Warframe all the time, boy howdy, this would be an uncomfortable subject, because it's not a good thing about the game and you wouldn't be able to escape it. But being that it is only a part of the discussion, you know. Mr. Fruit, you're saying the new mod I think only increases cast speed for the next cast. Maybe it should increase cast speed in general. Maybe that would help. So that would be like a practical thing. A lot of people also don't know that cast speed doesn't seem to stack beyond 50%, which maybe it'd be interesting if it did. I don't know. I feel like that would very rarely be any good, but it would be really interesting when it was. That's probably really overpowered on like 1 or 2 builds. I, as a game developer, would want to think about that before adding it to every frame. There's probably like 1 or 2 frames where it's like hilariously overpowered to give like 75 or 80 or 90% cast speed. But almost all of the time, I bet it doesn't matter. Again, but that's not how you put things in the game, you know? So, yeah, anyway, I find that really interesting. A delight to end the stream with a bit of discussion about that. Okay. You're a game developer? No, excuse me, Piper, the way I had meant to refer to it was like thinking from the perspective of a game developer. If you're the one changing the knobs in the game, you know, what you should think is, well, but we can't just put it in and hope, you know, like I would want to check to make sure there's nothing obviously overpowered about that. Sorry. You know, I think that someone who spends their time calmly and in a public forum with other intellectual people analyzing games, and who runs, like, who is a DM for a playgroup of Dungeons and Dragons, and who you know, does design games as per se, just doesn't publish them publicly. I'm very close to being a game developer, but not in the sense of like making a piece of software, which is a pretty, like, that's a huge thing. I really admire folks that are able to do that. I don't think I could even fit learning that into my daily life, even though I do wish to. So I want to, I have some reverence for folks that are out there doing the good and making games, doing the full solo game development. But I do have a lot in common with those people, I feel. Juicy. Hear those sound effects get through a little bit? Yatagami makes a quick good note about cast speed. I made it sound kind of better than it was, because I forgot that it's speed, not time. 50% cast speed makes you cast, you know, in 2/3 of the time, not in half. It doesn't cut the time in half. It makes you cast at 150% speed, which, yeah, right, that's different. So adding a cast speed stacking actually wouldn't be as overpowered as it sounds. That's a very good point. Oh, whoops, didn't swap to day form. Yike. Hey, show me a face. Piper, congratulations. That sounds neat. I will look forward to hearing about it in 10 months. You have my permission to plug that game if you finish it. If you get it to a point where you're going to be selling it to people, you have my permission to plug that game here. You folks are making something like this yourselves? Right on. Let me see it. And to quickly finish the awesome kind of surprise game discussion we had, finishing out the stream, I wanted to mention something Ace said that I think is a good solution to the problem we were discussing. Like, we were kind of saying maybe natural talent feels to a lot of players like it would just be like the default Xless mod in like pretty much every build. Now, I don't think that objectively that is particularly warranted in Warframe, in so much as you can say objectively for this kind of thing. I think that many of the possible good Warframe builds in Warframe do not meaningfully benefit from increasing their cast speed. So there are lots of situations where I feel it doesn't do nothing, but it's clearly able to be competed against, you know. And there are also some builds where it's really good. But I don't think this mod needs to be innate. Some people have said that. I think those people just haven't thought about exactly how little time they're spending casting on some builds, to be rather blunt. And again, I think that on paper, it should compete just fine with some other Exilus mod stuff. Cunning Drift is really good. This is like half of a perfectly good range mod, and range is so almost universally good. And the slide and friction makes you a little faster. Prime Surefooted is pretty good. A lot of the movement speed related mods, of Lightning Dash, Firewalker, are good. Like, they meaningfully make you more powerful. Handspring can be pretty good. There are good things competing for this slot, and I don't think that Natural Talent's actual power level is actually inappropriate with those things, but we were saying, like, players probably do think that broadly. I don't have stats on that, but it's a guess. And I'm not sure what you would do about that, I said. Well, Ace has a suggestion that I think is a good one. Your usual answer is writing effects. If a mod feels like it's kind of lacking something, you can sneak in a tiny amount of another stat. More options for stats across the board is neat by my eye, though shopping for stats is not everyone's copper tablet. Indeed, not everybody likes that, but I do think that, you know, you would, I don't know if you want to add to like Cunning Drift, but if you were to go back and take some of the Exilus mods that felt competed out and added a little bit of a stat, that would be an interesting way to help encourage players to view those as like more equal, which they are. You know, if we and the game developers are saying, well, Natural Talent isn't actually better than these other mods, but people think it is, how can we make them think it's not better without unbalancing the mods that don't actually warrant getting a buff? The answer is basically just give them an inconsequentially small amount of something that players want, like strength, you know? I think that's kind of ugly design, but the problem is that it's like a society, you know? A lot of our problems in the world are easy to solve if you just like constructed society from the ground up, but that's not how it was made. If you could just restart Warframe and turn back the clock, you could engineer a series of updates that would make people simply not think Natural Talent was overpowered, but we can't go back and do that anymore. So it may be necessary to do an order of operations that loops back around, you know. Another thing you could do that I'm sure they don't want to do, but it would probably work, you could do is make the numerical value on Natural Talent lower, like change it to 25% or 33%, but change it to cast, like to reduce cast time and not cast speed. So the number is lower, you know, brain go number lower, but it wouldn't actually be weaker. And then people would like, they would want the casting speed and put it on, but people who were just saying it's always the best would think it was worse and try other things. But then when they really wanted it, they would go back to it. So I don't know, that's nefarious, but what I would do as a developer, if I didn't care about getting negative press from changing something, would be to like nerf it, but it's not actually worse, you know. Isn't it more that people think it's underpowered, like it doesn't deserve a real mod slot? Right, but we're talking about making it an Exilus mod, which I think would then flip the script on that. They think it's like underpowered compared to other mods, but they feel like they need it, which means if they had a slot that was dedicated to it, I suspect many players would just automatically put it on. And again, like it's okay if players want stuff. We don't want to get rid of something because it's popular, but there's no point in making them jump through the hoops of making a slot for it if it doesn't like... If it should just be innate, then it could just be innate. But I don't think it should. Like, I think Warframe isn't a game where this is warranted as an innate effect. I think it's cool design space that you can build for this as a decision. The trick is to make the players feel like it's cool design space to do that. You know, Mr. Food, a similar thing with augments. This is kind of a whole other discussion, but I'm very interested in it, so we're just going to end the stream talking about it. A whole other part of the discussion is how people don't think that there's a whole crowd that doesn't think that augments are good, like just period, basically. The idea being that there are like too many mods you need. But the thing is that most augments do something that is either analogous to a normal mod or like it basically just is a new ability. And if a mod was a helmet ability, you would think that was good. A lot of people just think that the mods that are like that aren't good. You know, a lot of people just haven't used duality, and their complaint is they're gonna say like we need a dedicated augment slot, and what that means is they don't think this is worth a mod slot, but they actually haven't used it, and it turns out this is very powerful, or it doesn't feel powerful. Energy transfer is an awkward mod for a lot of reasons, but in a very complicated series of events, it's basically just a defensive mod. You can charge Maim in Night form and get shields and be able to cast Rest. Why is it not worth a mod slot for Vitality? That's fine. It's not Vitality, but it does have a similar benefit. There's no reason this shouldn't be competing for normal mod slots, but a lot of players don't feel like they should be. And personally, I think that makes it a different problem. I think that's similar to the natural talent thing. I don't know. Again, I feel like Warframe is also a game where one's impressions rule a little bit, because you don't actually need a lot of these things. Warframe is a touch easy at times, and that leads to player perception that they need a thing because they want a thing, rather than getting the stress testing that would lead to them finding out what would benefit them more, which not everybody would prefer. I don't think it's better for Warframe to be harder, and Warframe has gotten some stuff that's harder. Like, I'm not sure what the answer is to that stuff. I just think it's interesting to note that something about the way Warframe is designed leads to a certain attitude about builds, which I think is pretty interesting. If builds are less necessary, it does predictably make conversations about the Buildcraft less... I'm just going to be blunt and say intelligent, but I hate to say it that way. I think people would like to discuss these things in their true form, but it's difficult. A lot of the time that we discuss these builds or try to test these builds, we can't, because there isn't really anywhere to use them, So anyway, I've brought that conversation up a lot of times on the stream, and I feel like I've always wanted to come back to it in a way I felt was more positive and targeted, which I feel like we just did, which I think is good. Just quickly a word about, we talked a little bit about weapons for this second build. The one where you're swapping, you can charge Maim and then be in Night form, so you can use Rest and the Mend shields to defend yourself with Pillage. And we didn't test this at a higher level. I talked about the duality damage. I talked about weapons a little. Like, the main thing is that duality will use whatever weapon you had, and you may want to pick some weapons that are like particularly good when used by the AI. So yeah, that's really all I have to say about that. This build is quite general. Like, if you're going to use it for ESO, for example, Elite Sanctuary Onslaught is probably going to reward you for just like an explosive AoE weapon. I don't think there are like particularly specific weapon synergies here. I did mention before that I think this build would like some energy, and you could use some arcanes for that. There are some options. I have Energize, and this is a build on which I use it, but I don't think you need to go nuclear. Remember that because you have Mend and Maim active, Xeneric stuff like mostly doesn't work. The energy regen from Wellspring and Energy Pulse won't work. So I would look elsewhere. I'm not sure what I would do for focus, but just keep that in mind. Yeah, some people, as a closing thought, want to use like a finisher weapon so that occasionally you can get some big money with like you rest an enemy, they're asleep, and then you just pop off and kill them, like a heavier enemy. I've in the past enjoyed the Sinoid Heliocore for this, because this will make a Spectre when you do the thing, but they change it to heavy attacks. Anyway, there are some weapons that do good stuff when you do a finisher, okay? You could consider one of those. I don't know, I don't think it's a huge deal. Just catching up on chat a little bit before we go. But yeah, thanks for the great show, folks. Thanks for the great discussion while we just jammed a few of these builds. Again, I had like a pretty targeted show to give about Equinox, so I loved hearing your finer points of discussion. I thought that was really fun. A little different from the Ember discussion we had, where we kind of workshopped. You basically just re-taught me how to play Ember, and then we ended up with, I think, a really cool build in response, with a really interesting gameplay loop. But I also think Ember is a Warframe that is less Buildcrafty, like the design of a lot of new Warframes. Ember is a Warframe that kind of has a gameplay loop built in, and if you change too much stuff, it just doesn't work, let alone become a different build. Sometimes there are some interesting emergent builds there, but Equinox is just a different kind of frame, is what I think. I thought that was fun. just going to catch back up on chat a little bit. I wish I could stay for longer, but I can't, so I'll do the best I can. I see a thing from Mr. Foot. I see Sir Jaguar. Sir Jaeger? Anyway, hello. I'll get those two, and then I'm going to have to go. Mr. Foot said about augments. I think the main problem, going back to our discussion before, is that there's a lot of inconsistencies in the augment design. Just looking at Equinox, you have one augment that maybe shouldn't exist, one that offers a little quality of life, one that increases the utility of an ability, and one that adds a completely new mechanic. People tend to focus on only one of those types of augment, and then they argue for or against the augment slot. That is absolutely true. I don't think that's a problem necessarily, but something that you could do that could be relatively simple that might help. Digital Extremes, here's my 2 cents about that. What if you categorized augments into the type of effect they were trying to be and made them look different based on those effects? I don't know how much this is currently working as design language. There are already a few places in Warframe where something like this is done, and I'm not sure that people entirely get it. For example, amalgam mods. What do amalgam mods do? And some of you might say something, some of you might not. Well, the basic thing that these have been defined as is that they all give you something elsewhere in your loadout in that slot. But other types of mods, like set mods, also do that. And then galvanized mods, like these, they often like stack something up. They're a variant of a mod, like the amalgam mods. So there is a design language for, like, we all know what a galvanized mod looks like when we see it, and then we might think of those mods a certain way. It may be possible to use design language like that to help players think about mods differently, because there are, I agree with you, Mr. Food, at least 4 different kinds of mods, like they're augment mods. If you put them into buckets, there's several buckets, okay? Like, not just a few buckets. And you couldn't simply buff or debuff them. And I don't think they, like, shouldn't exist. I mean, some of them maybe. But I don't think that augments that make an ability do a new thing versus make an ability better. Like, I want both of those things. But maybe communicating that to the player in a better way would help. That's a thought. Jaeger, you said the basic holster speed of the game feels slow for the pace of the game, especially since melee is instant, but I find that modding for it isn't worth it. What do you think? I have a couple thoughts about that, sure. One is that I don't think that Warframe rewards you very highly very often for swapping between your primary and your secondary specifically. I don't like how slow the swap to deploy a heavy weapon is, but that's kind of a separate issue. It's sort of not, but anyway, to contain the discussion for now, if you'll forgive me. I do think the deploying the heavy weapon discussion, that's interesting. I would like to talk about that another time. Because you can swap from melee to your weapon instantly, the only one of the 3 swaps, primary to melee, primary to secondary, and secondary to melee, that is slow is primary to secondary. And I find that Warframe doesn't often reward you very highly for doing that. Some folks will approach the game where they're fighting very, very high level enemies very frequently, and they find it beneficial to load them up with status and then attack with a different weapon. That's where that tension might come in a little bit. But otherwise, I feel like holstering weapons, like them swapping, is just a very small part of the game. Don't get me wrong, I think that's an argument for making there be no holster speed. But yeah, like, modding for it. The thing about that is that the weapon Exilis slot, and as always with mod slots, it's all about the competition. There are weapons where, like, there's many weapon Exilis mods, and none of them do anything. And on those weapons, there's really no cost to modding for holster speed, besides unlocking the slot. But then there are weapons where there's, like, a ton of weapon Exilis mods I'd want to use. I think that the weapon Exilis slot itself is unbalanced, and you could approach this problem by rebalancing, like, what mods are available there, such that when holster speed is basically free because there's almost no competition, maybe it would be a little less free. And when it isn't, when it feels like there's a lot of competition, maybe we could somehow buff that. For example, I think, like, the holster speed mods could maybe increase your damage by a little bit. I think that's okay. It's not good to put straight damage here. But as long as it's only when you swap weapons, it doesn't increase your DPS outright. It just means if you wanted to swap to the weapon frequently, it rewards you a little more for doing so. But then maybe players would think that it was too beneficial and use these way too much, which would make the weapon X slot experience less interesting in the opposite way. Shit. Anyway, that's the best I can do for now. I don't know. I think it's kind of a minor thing, to be honest with you, but I don't think that the problem you're highlighting is like a non-issue. And I think the most straightforward thing to do would be to remove it from the game. It's like it's a small part of the game anyway, and it feels a bit awkward to balance. So I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, I hope that will do for now. I would be interested at some point to talk about the heavy weapon deploy thing, or just heavy weapons in general, really, because I love them, but they're like sort of taxed for no reason. They're not any better or worse than other weapons, but they take longer to deploy, which automatically makes them bad most of the time. Why? Anyway, that's like a whole thing. What I would like actually is for them to just be stronger than other weapons, and for them to get mods that build into them being deployed. Like something happens when you deploy them. I don't want to get rid of that on heavy weapons. I think that makes them unique. That's cool. We can use that. But it does bring up a broader concept about like the design space of weapon swapping speed. Like, why is that? It's like barely even a thing at the end of the day. So why is it even still a thing? I can agree with you on that. Thanks for watching, folks. Thanks for the show. I don't have a lot to say about Ragnavar and Lord Rust here discussing like critique of the operator rework. I just want to remind you that often a very small vocal minority plays off each other. And I do not mean to insult you when I say this, but remember that it is very easy to perceive that small group as being like everybody dislikes this. You see like 10 different people comment on, Reddit or whatever, that they don't like the operator rework, when it turns out those people all just copied each other's opinions and like literally no one else thinks that. Now, I don't think that's true for the operator rework. I think there are more people that dislike it. People also dislike change. People dislike anything. I would encourage you to try to ignore them. I think like they may even change their mind, and maybe that's not the most fleshed out opinion. I don't know. But there are reasons to dislike parts of the operator rework. I think some of them are misunderstandings too. Things that they said they're going to add in, but people don't know they're going to add in. Some of that happened to me. I said, yeah, okay, but why'd they remove this? And you all told me they're going to add it back in. Anyway, and I think it's completely reasonable to note that I believe Digital Extremes listens to the vocal minority a little bit too much. And I think that they do that as Digital Extremes. This is a little harsh. I'm sorry, but I do think this. I don't mean to be rude. I feel that that is sometimes done as a substitute for good development. I think that the community knows what they don't like, but they do not know a good solution almost all of the time. And I feel you take their solution a little too often. I think that Digital Extremes knows this, so I don't want to harp on that advice too much. I think it's something they're working on, and it is important to address the player's vocal concerns because it is automatic negative advertising for your game that you should do something about sometimes. But making the game literally worse because of it is not good, of course. And they weren't trying to do that. I just think it has happened before. I can agree with that. Anyway, I'm sorry I don't have like a lot to say about this. I just wanted to offer a hand about that because I share that frustration, Lord Rusty, and I don't have a lot of advice. I'm sure that you make a real effort. I don't mean to undermine your surely Herculean task of trying to enjoy this game that you feel like other people are ruining. I feel that exact way, which is why I did this whole career. So I really do relate, and I wish I could do more. But anyway, I wanted to say that before we went. Thanks for the show, folks. I have to hit the kitchen. I'll talk to you all, next week, if you're around this time, every week. I would love to have you back. We're going to do Excalibur next week, so bring your ideas for Excalibur stuff, Helminth abilities, types of builds, weapons you like to use with Excalibur, companions focus that you like to use with Excalibur. If you have lingering questions, you can submit them here, and I'll answer them during the break this time next week. And I'm also going to be streaming tomorrow and Sunday at this time. We started about like 2 hours ago that time. So you can check my schedule, which you can find, you know where schedules are linked and stuff on Twitch. You'll find it. And yeah, I'll be around on Friday and Sunday as well. Hope to see you then. Talk to y'all soon.